Let's get started here. The Delhi era is pretty well defined. It starts in 1833 and it kind of smooshes into the 1870s. It's really some part of Radnor that is still being developed, but it's something that is of interest to everybody, I think. It was initiated in 1833 with Edward Evans' survey. From 1833 to 1873 was a period of extreme change for the village and its people as it moved from pioneer living in log homes to modern buildings and into organized community living. The major event of the Civil War had great impact, and at the close of the Delhi era, there was the beginning of the railroads and Radnor itself. The following represents some people, buildings, and events in the village during those years. 7th, 8th, and 9th in 1833. Edward Evans was to be the proprietor. If you want to look this up, it's in Delaware County Deed Records, Volume 12, page 124. As you can see, it shows up part of the area of Radnor, above Radnor Road as platted, but those plats were never sold. So Edward Evans was born in Wales in 1787. He was married to Mary. And I have a question mark. I don't know what her maiden name was, and it's the problem of genealogy in Wales. I think there are only 10 surnames and probably 10 male names and 10 female names, and it just really gets to be a problem when you try to look up the family. Everyone has a David, a Thomas, and Mary, and a Margaret, and so it's really difficult to separate out the families. But he was married in Wales. They were married in Wales in 1812. So I kind of wonder if they weren't planning to come, and the events of the War of 1812 kept them from coming for a couple of 3 years. In 1819, he, Mary, and 4 children came to this area. They purchased Lot 5 in Tier 3 of the Pew Survey from Thomas Davis. This lot is the northwest and the southwest corner of Radnor Road. There was a few survey lots that were sold by the court administrator. And then finally, in 1847, William Watkins purchased the remaining estate. Now, remember William Watkins, because we'll be talking about him in a little bit. One of the things that I got noticed pretty quickly was that there are several Georgian-style architecture in the area. And what I'm talking about, if you look here, there are 5 windows across here, and there's a center entrance, and there's two chimneys. And there's also, on this particular example, there's an extension out here. Some did the extension as an L shape. Now, the first one that I really want to talk about is this one. It's the Adams Carey House. It was built in 1823. It's pretty worse for wear now. It's about to fall down, but it's up just north of the on 203. The building is still there. Again, you can see that it is a Georgian architecture. It's got the 5 windows above and the center entrance. Very basic house, but it fits in with the to have a pretty substantial family involved in it. I'm going to call this the Adams Carey House. I'm using the surname of the family and the maiden name of the wife in the family. So that's how I will use on the rest of the names of the houses. Elijah Adams was born in New Jersey in 1779. He moved with his family very quickly to Pennsylvania. And in 1802, married Nancy Carey in Pennsylvania. And again, the whole family moved again about 1810, and they moved to Sunbury. And Nancy and Elijah moved on to Radnor in 1812. They had 11 children, and they were very active in the community during the Delhi era and beyond. They built the first Georgian-style brick house in Radnor Township. Nancy died 1834. Elijah remarried a widow, Mary Pettibone Landon, who died in 1869. Elijah was politically active. He was a justice of peace. He was a supporter of the early Methodist Church circuit riders. And there's a pretty good description of a three-pen barn that held the services for the Methodist Church. The center pen was a large thrashing floor, and so that was a very smooth floor and very nice area, and that's where the church services were held. He was a founding member that supported the first Methodist church building in 1858. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Elijah died in 1873, and the rest of the family is buried there in Radnor Cemetery as well. Now, we're going to come down the road about a half a mile towards Radnor, and we find that in 1866, there was a Georgian-style house. I think the guy who did the sketch took a little bit of liberty here. He only put 3 windows. There was actually 5 in the building. And he also put in some rail fences. I wonder whether that was ever done here or not. I thought that was all a Virginia deal. But it really makes a very nice appearance. Humphrey's Chidlaw House. Humphreys was born in Wales in 1798. He immigrated to the Radnor Township about 1820. He and Elizabeth Chidlaw, who was born in Wales 1801, were married on September 11th, 1825, here in Radnor. They were the parents of 2 children, Benjamin, that we hadn't mentioned before, but Morris, which we had just mentioned in the previous slide there. He was born in 1829, only a couple of years before his mother passed away. Elizabeth's parents were born in Wales. They were Ben Sr. Chidlaw, and Mary Chidlaw. Ben Sr. died in 1821, and they discussed about whether they wanted to go back to Wales or not. But the family decided, Elizabeth, Ben Jr. and Mary decided they would stay. And Mary purchased this land from Evan Jenkins, and her son-in-law, John Humphreys, farmed it. John eventually owned the land and passed it on to his son Morris. The land was highly productive, supporting a large Georgian-style farmhouse, and has passed down through the Humphrey family for a number of years. Now, we're going to come down the road another half mile to the corner, and we find another Georgian-style house. I'm going to call this the Watkins-Jones house. Some people know it more as the Delhi house. Again, it just shows the characteristics of Georgian-style architecture. 5 windows above, center entrance. William Watkins was born to Evan and Margaret Davis Watkins in Montgomeryshire, Wales in 1795. In June of 1820, he took ship passage to the U.S. And on the same ship, he met his future wife, Mary Jones, traveling with her parents, David E. and Dorothea. Now, William's father died in September of 1820, just a few months after he left home. And I know his mother came to live here, but I don't know the exact sequence of events that happened. But she is buried here in the Radnor Cemetery. William and Mary Jones were married in 1823, and they also had 11 children. In 1847, as I said, William and Mary purchased the land of Edward Evans' estate. In 1850, they built this Georgian brick home, and in 1856, it became the Delhi House Tavern. This is a picture of Roy Plymel and Anne Humphreys, whose husband was a descendant of Morris Humphreys. The sign is now in the museum. You can see that the bottom of the stars is kind of rotted. Roy said he had to really stabilize it before he could move it. It was in pretty bad shape. But it's been stabilized, and it's in the museum now if you really want to look at it. Now, we're going to come down the road again about a half a mile, and we come on to the Baker Warren House. It was built in 1849. Again, shows the same Georgian style architecture. It looks a little better in this shot. This is what it looks like more nowadays than it did at that point. But John Baker and his wife Eliza Warren erected the house in 1849, even though the carved lintel says 1850. I guess the story is that the stone carver didn't like to make the numbers 49, so he made 50. They conducted the tavern here for several years. 4 of their 9 children were born here. The family was greatly disrupted by the Civil War as 2 sons, Robert and Joseph, left the home to serve in the Union Army. Robert enlisted June 5, 1861, to Company T of the 4th Regiment of Ohio Volunteers. He was wounded in battle and died November 19, 1862. He was on his way home, and he made it back to Delaware and died here in Delaware. Joseph joined up with Company A, 145 of the regiment, 145th Regiment of the Ohio Volunteers. This was a musicians unit, which was very important during the Civil War. That was usually how the orders were given to the people in the field. So he was pretty active there. John and Eliza sold the home in September of 1862 to Reese and Sarah Williams Jones. These are the ancestors of Ann Jones and Pam Jones Surratt. John and Eliza retired, staying in Radnor until their deaths. This building no longer exists. It was the building across the street from the Delhi House on the northeast corner. It's now where the memorials are for the in the cemetery. And for all that you can think about, this has got to be a ranch-style house with a walkout basement. And it was built in 1845, and it just really amazes me that style was used. In 1945, I would have thought it was okay, but 1845, well, Robert Powell was born in Wales, March 3rd, 1785. He and wife Ann Williams were married in Wales. They immigrated to Radnor Township in 1842, bringing 2 children. John, which is this is his family in front of the home. and he had a sister, Margareta. They built a home and dry goods business on the northeast corner of Radnor and 203, and Ann died in 1848. Robert in 1872. John here ran the store for a few years, and then Evan Jones, and finally E.I. Jones when it was destroyed by fire in 1928. The store was the bottom floor of the building right here, and this area, and the kitchen for the house was up here, and so the fire started in the kitchen here and burned the entire thing down. A son of John, William R., which is the last one right there, became a respected architect. He designed the Litchgate entrance to the cemetery, completed in 1910, and the Radnor High School, first phase 1917, second phase 1928. Now we're going to come back down the street a little bit again and show some early pictures of the Morton House. That's this building right here. You can see some of the decorations that were used in the early days, and these buildings here are, I know one of them is a log cabin, but I'm not sure about the other one. So these are very early homes in the area. You can see the church building in the background, and even see the chimney for the museum nowadays. But this home was actually a doctor's home for a while. But Thomas Morton Jr. was born in Wales in 1814. He erected this 11-room brick house and store. It was open for business in April of 1853. The store operated until February of 1857, when Thomas suddenly died. He died insolvent because of just purchasing large amounts of the store goods. The home and the store were sold in 1858 to cover his debts, and was sold to Benjamin Williams, who continued to operate a general store here. And there were several owners that followed with varying amounts of success until it was made into apartments in the late 1970s. Thomas Morton Jr. never married, so there was no family to follow on that. But his father's farm was right across the road here. The first school was made in 1812, and it was right across the street. Half of it in the plat of New Baltimore, half of it on Thomas Morton Sr.'s land. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is really the churches in the area. And I could spend the whole time talking about this and nothing else. But it's really the story of the Welsh language. The Welsh language is not taught in any of the school system. It was only taught in the schools, in the church systems, in the church schools. It's really ironic because the Welsh language lasted for over 1,000 years, right next door to the much more aggressive English monarchs, and yet they were able to hang on to their language. And in less than 100 years here in this area, probably more like 50 years, the language went from being the only thing spoken in the church to very seldom spoken in the church by 1870. By 1890, it was totally out of the church language. This is the 7 churches that were in operation during the Delhi era. The Congregational Church, built in 1867, was a replacement for an earlier church built in 1841. Presbyterian Church, 1853, was also a replacement church. The old stone church, which was at that point in time called the Radnor Thompson Old Stone Church, is still down there. The last time I looked, it's on Route 37. If you look at the center one, the Baptist church, this was the church that was built in 1863. It was a replacement for one. If you've got family members, all of the people that are pictured in here are identified in the Swickheimer history book. So if you've got members, you might want to look that up to see if you got family members there. The top right, which is the Welch ME Church, I don't know very much about it, but there was a church building there on that site before 1875, and it was replaced in 1876. It was moved to the back. It was a frame building. And the bottom one is the Methodist Episcopal Church, built in 1858. That building is the one right next to the post office on the south side, and it shows it had memorial windows in it as well. Those were sold to a church in Michigan during the 1970s. I've left the last one to last. Forgive me, David, for saying this Trogadollar church. This one was built in 1849. It was a replacement for one that was built in 1841. So it very quickly grew. Church grew, and there's still a very nice cemetery down there. And so, like I say, we could spend a lot of time here with this church. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of schools that are right in the village. And the first one we're going to look at was, this is the early school. It was frame construction with hand-hewn timbers, and this one was one of the 9 one-room schools in Radnor Township during this time period. It was erected between the Powell House that I just showed you and the cemetery in 1847. The first school I have any record of was built right across the road right at the half of the lot was on the old New Baltimore Plat, and half of it on Thomas Morton. So Thomas Morton Sr. This bad shot, but this is a picture taken in 1901. It's actually the building back at the backside of Taylor Street. It eventually became the Grange Hall, so probably people know it as the Grange Hall more than anything else. But it was the first part of this building was erected in 1868, and that's the front part right here. And the top floor was the town hall. This part right in here was the town hall, and this down here was the school. So it was really a one-room school. And the first edition was back here. You can see that was put on here. There were 2 more editions put on before 1917. And they decided they couldn't add anything more to it. So they sold it to the Grange Hall, and eventually it's a private home now. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the things that were going on in the community. This is the first IOOF hall. 1850, the golden age of fraternalism began and saw the rise of several lodges here, including the Independent Order of Oddfellows, the IOOF. And the reason I mentioned it in particular was because it was the first lodge in the area that would accept both men and women to do the express purpose of visiting the sick, relieve the distressed, bury the dead, and educate the orphan. The Radnor IOF Hall was built in 1854 on the southwest corner of Taylor Street and Radnor 203. And as I said, the upper level was the Lodge Hall, and the lower level was used as a general store for several years. This is more what it looks like today. It's, I think, the home of the Poole family remodeling company. Okay, I want to mention the cemetery. The first burial there was Sarah Kyle in 1807. But apparently the cemetery was still on land that was owned by David Pugh. So it was not officially a cemetery until it was a burying ground, as they say. It was on February 4th, 1835, he wrote the deed to the trustees for 20 poles by 20 poles, 2.5 acres. That was for $25. That's $10 an acre. So Mr. Pugh made a few bucks since it was 75 cents to start with. That in today's dollars, that's $25,000. As of 2020, there are over 3,000 burials in that cemetery. But there were 7 Delhi men died while serving during the Civil War. 6 of them are buried in the Radnor Cemetery. They are Robert Baker, one of the Baker family, Robert Roberts, David H. Thomas, Edward J. Watkins, who was William Watkins' son, James M. Weingarner, and John E. Crafody. I need to know some more about the Weingarners and the Crafodys. I don't have very much in the family name, so if someone is related to them, let me know some data. The 7th soldier is David Williams. He was born here in 1837 and died in 1864. He's listed on his parents' stone in the Radnor Cemetery, but he died of starvation July 26, 1864 at Andersonville Prison. And he's buried in the Andersonville Cemetery. And the only information is his prisoner number and his name. So we need to get after it a little bit there. I'm going to go east of Radnor 203. And that's Meredith Station. This is the depot. It was the crossing of the Columbus, Hocking Valley, and Toledo Railroad that was organized in May of 1872. It was to be the Delhi mail stop. However, another Delhi in southwest Ohio registered first with the Postal Service. Therefore, our Delhi became Radnor Mail Drop. And it was one of 2 stops in the Radnor Township area, the other being Robertsville, about 3 miles northwest of Meredith. Meredith Station at one time had a stockyard, a grain shipping, which it still does, a feed store, and a large hardware store. Also, the Columbus, Delaware, and Marion Electric Car Company had a station here. And this is the picture of the station, and you can just make out a car, right? One of the electric cars right here. So 1870s, that's the end of the Delhi era, the start of the Radnor Village era. I'll take any questions that I can answer. I won't take any that I can't.
All the bricks for all those Jordan homes, that was local brick, or do you know?
Yeah, most of them were made usually right from the area where the house was constructed. What they usually did was they molded up the clay into blocks, let it dry for a period of time, and then they would pile them up in a beehive shape over top of a big pile of wood. They'd burn the wood, and it would cure the brick that way. The inside ones would usually be the things like for a fireplace and the like, and the outside ones were usually not as cured, so they usually end up in the sidewalks and the like. Ones in the center, which was the good ones, would use for the building.
So there was clay locally.
Yes, I know the one that the Baker Tavern one was built from clay right across the road from it, and I know the one that in 1867 when they built the Congregational Church that's there, they made the brick on the north side of the lot. So if you go out there now, you can look and see where there's quite a cutoff, and so they use quite a few brick, quite a bit of dirt there. So it was made here.
Where did the word dog come from?
I assumed that he liked Delhi, India. There was a war going on at that point in time, so Delhi was mentioned in the newspaper quite a bit. So that's the only thing I can think of. I don't know for sure.
Also, during that, you were talking about those buried from the Civil War. After the family, there were some very large families. Penrys were huge. They had a lot of children. And they started building from Radnor north toward Prospect, a lot of farms. And by the Civil War, my family were in Prospect, just to the north. And my great-grandfather, John Price Penry, was in the Civil War and wounded Atlanta in the second day of the siege of Atlanta with a Confederate mini-ball. He went on to be the commander of the 9th of Pythias in Prospect. That was a Civil War fraternity. And so he did that, and then he buried in the Prospect Cemetery.
There's quite a number of people buried in the Prospect Cemetery when they started it up there. I think it was kind of the thing to do at that point, was to move people up to the Prospect. But then a lot of people then came back and started burying at the Radnor Cemetery. I saw someone have a hand up over there. Yes.
Maybe this is but was this area heavily forested?
Yes, it was heavily forested and it was wet. There were, this whole area was almost a swampy kind of thing. And so they started taking the trees off, and then the water would drain into the Sauter River. I guess the Sauter River has changed quite a bit from what it was when they started farming it. Yes.
Can I make a correction on the bricks?
Okay.
What they did is the lumber folks came in first. They cut down the trees and made the boards, and all the off material was saved to fire the kiln for the bricks.
Mm-hmm.
They dug out the basement, which was usually all nothing but clay for a house.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a lot of bricks. And the kiln that they used was called a stove kiln. And basically, it's flat on the ends, and it kind of goes up like this. And it had various places that they could use for fire mouths then. So then the leftover wood was then used to fire the stove kiln. And the bricks on the outside didn't get as hot as the bricks on the inside. So the inside bricks were used on the outside of the house. The bricks on the outside were often used on the interior walls where they weren't gonna get much weather. So that's how they did it all over Ohio, because we were so forested. They had plenty of wood, and we have plenty of clay to this day, as any fellow says.
Yeah. Over just right at the bridge, it's going across 203 or across the river. In a field just to the north of the Radnor Road, there used to be, I don't think they show much anymore, but there used to be round black spots where they actually burned the brick there.
That was much later, but they were beehive kilns, and
Yeah.
and they were very effective because you didn't have partially burned bricks.
Okay, thank you.
You had also mentioned the fact that the Welsh language was taught in the churches but not in the schools. That was done purposely, both in Wales and in the United States, with the English suppressing the Welsh language. When you were in school here, if you spoke Welsh, you were punished. And if you were in Wales, you had to put a sign around your neck if you were a child and wear that as a punishment because you'd spoken Welsh. And by the way, in Welsh, for what you said, thank you, diolch yn fawr. So if you want to know some Welsh, there you go. Thank you very much. It's diolch yn fawr.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not hard. Diolch. Thank.
No, I'm saying that sounds.
Yeah. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
My pile is moved, folks. I'm done.